Okay, hello everyone. In this video, we'll take a look at how we can use the Orange software application to explore and prepare a data set for data mining analysis. This video is going to use the same data set that I had used in the previous video where we did the exploration and preparation with Excel. I'll include the link in the description. So if you haven't seen that video, you might want to take a look at that first. It is a bit longer than what I think this is going to be, but covers a bit more of the explanations and descriptions for the ways and reasons about why I was doing the exploration, the preparation the way I did. So this video, I won't focus too much on those descriptive pieces. It'll be more focused on just how we can go about exploring and transforming our data by using the Orange application. One thing I did want to do to start with was, because this is common, is to show how we can load up the Excel spreadsheet that we were working with using the Orange software tool, but also that sometimes there are issues with that. And so we'll begin with that and then talk about how we can export our data as a CSV from Excel, and then we can pull it into Orange and then keep on keeping on from there. So to get started, let's just fire up Orange here. I've got my bank churners Excel document on the desktop here. So that's what I'm going to begin with. So we're just going to start with a brand new project here in Orange. You could save it right away if you like, or save it later. There's not going to be, for me, much benefit for that. I'm just going to be doing the exploration and preparation piece. But if you are looking to save this as a workflow for exploring later or coming back to later, then you definitely want to save this out to an Orange file. So the first thing we need to do is we need to load in our file. So we can drop in a file widget. It's probably already got some previously linked input, so that's why I'm getting the red marker here, but no big deal. So once we come in, you're going to want to choose what file you want to load. So I'm going to do a search here on my desktop, and there's my bank churners work Excel workbook. So I'm going to select that. And sometimes if you have a workbook that has a lot of different sheets on it, so for example, in this workbook, we have a pivot table and a pivot chart. So Orange is probably not going to be able to work with the types of worksheets that are in it. And so it's going to fail to load. So you might get an error like this. So error listing available sheets. So if that ever happens, and clearly it happens, it's happening to us now, what I recommend then is to just go back into the Excel file and then save your data out as CSV. So I'm going to fire this up in Excel. We can see here's the previous work that we had done, our exploration summary, pivot tables, and charts, and the prepared data the way that we had left it from Excel. So because I want to explore how to do this type of work in Orange, I'm going to begin with just the original data set here again. And you'll see that in Orange it's kind of nice. You don't have to do a lot of the transformative work. The tools and widgets can kind of figure stuff out, but we'll still go through the process of preparing it anyways. So what I'm going to do here, once I'm on the bank churners sheet, is I'm just going to choose a file, save as. And in the file format, we can choose the CSV option. And I'm going to save it as bank churners prepared. So I'll save it still to my desktop and click save. And what's going to happen is, because there are multiple sheets in the workbook, a CSV is obviously just a single flat file, it doesn't have sheets. So it's going to tell us, hey, in order to save the whole workbook, this isn't going to work. You're just going to get this sheet as a CSV, which is perfect. That's what I want. So I'm going to click OK. And now that's what I'm looking at is, this bank churners prepared CSV. But we don't need to do anything else with this. So once that's done, I'm just going to quit Excel. Don't save. That's fine. And you can't see it on this screen, but here is my bank churners prepared CSV. So now we have that available as a CSV file. We can come back into Orange. We can choose the CSV, and we should have no trouble loading that up. We can see here the field names, right? The types, the roles that they play, and in some cases for categorical features, we can see what the values are in those cases as well. Now, we could do some work here with like selecting columns, and we might get to that later in this video, but probably we'll get there when it comes to the actual mining piece. But one thing I am going to do right away is identify my attrition flag as the target. So this is what we're basically looking to classify for, if you remember from the previous video. So I'm going to just update that role here. The rest of these are all fine as features. I don't think we need to worry about changing anything else. Dependent count, customer age, these are all categorical. If it turns out I've missed something, we can come back to it here. But I think for the most part, it's got these things right. So I'm going to click apply. We can see at the bottom, let me scroll this up so we can see it a bit better on the screen. It shows us what we're loading in from this file. So we can see here, like we had seen previously, we've got 10,127 examples or instances. There are 21 variables, 20 features, and 1 target. And we can also see right away here that nothing's missing. So that tells us we're not going to have to impute any values. But as part of a cleaning process, that is something that we could also do in Orange with the Impute widget. We can briefly look at that as well. So now that we've got our file loaded, we can come in here and begin our cleaning and exploration piece. So like I mentioned, we can already see that there are no missing fields. But one thing we might want to do is just be able to visualize the data as a table. So we can drop the data table widget in the workspace, and then we can hook our file up to the data table and then open that up. And now we can see what we're looking at here. So again, this is kind of like a spreadsheet view of the data set. We can see here again the number of instances. There's no missing data, 20 features, 1 target with 2 values. So our attrition flag has either existing customer or attrited customer. And those are what those 2 values are. The one other thing you can do here, so I mean beyond just kind of exploring and sorting, you can sort by column header. So we might want to sort by client number, for example, customer age. But we can also visualize the numeric values, and they'll be colored by their instance class. So if we choose to visualize the numeric values, now we get kind of a colorization across, and also in terms of the range, we can see what those look like as well. So our attrited customers are colored in blue, our existing customers are colored in red. So you could do some sorting and see if there was some grouping based on target class that way. It's kind of interesting. And you can also save these things out. So for example, if you click down on the bottom, there's a little file icon there. You could save that out to like an HTML document, or you could choose to print that. So there's a couple of options to get that out as well. So you could utilize this again just to kind of quickly review and look through all of the data that's been pulled in. Now, most of what we're going to do here as far as exploration goes will be tied to things that we can do with the data, but also in the visualize selection of widgets here as well. So we'll look at a number of widgets across both of these categories. One thing that I'll do before we get into that, though, is just briefly talk about the idea of cleaning or sanitizing our data. So if we had missing fields or missing values, which we don't, but if we did, we would want to be able to deal with those. And so there is an Impute widget that you can use to help with that. So if you drag that onto the workspace and connect your file up to it, and we can double click it here, we can see what some of the options are for imputing and dealing with missing values in the data set if we had any. So for example, the default method could be to just do nothing, leave them, but currently it's selected to take an average of the most frequent, so average or the most frequent. So it would be a mode, for example, if it were a categorical, or an average if it was continuous. So we could choose to say, keep the instance in the data set, but for the missing values, use an average or a mode value and replace them. The typical default would be in cases where the missing values you thought were pertinent would be to remove those instances. So that could be also your default. And there's a couple of other ones. So as a distinct values, random values, depending on what you feel like the fields are, you could choose a default mode. So you might go with remove, and then specifically looking through each of the individual fields, you could select them independently and choose something other than the default. So it could be a remove in any case by default, but maybe if we find missing client numbers, we don't care about that, right? Client numbers are probably not useful in identifying attrited customers. So maybe if they're empty, we don't impute them, we just leave them. So there's options that you can use here to deal with those missing values, and then you can see what happens as you kind of clean these things. your input number of instances. And as you begin to filter, you would see what that does to the output number. So you can see if you're reducing, by a whole bunch or maybe just a few. You can see that here in the Impute widget. Again, we don't have anything to impute. We don't have any missing values, but that is one widget that's useful for dealing with those things in Orange. So let's remove that. All right. First thing we'll do, kind of like we did in Excel as well, is we want to just kind of get an overall view of what we're looking at in terms of the variables independently. And a good widget for that is the feature statistics widget. So if we drag and drop that on, hook up our file, we can open this widget and see what we've got here. So again, kind of like we did in Excel, very quickly, we can see all of the fields. The one nice thing about Orange here is because we've identified our target variable, there's other options in here, but it's going to default to that target, and it's going to color our values here by in this case, the target label. So we're using the attrition flag to color these, and so within the distributions, we can already see how the attrited versus existing customers are kind of distributed amongst the instances themselves. So that's kind of a nice feature here of Orange. We don't have to do some transformative work like we would have done in Excel to see the same thing. But we can scroll across and we can see, so there's a distribution, the center, so it's either a mode for categorical or a mean average for the continuous values. We have dispersion, which is just a relative standard deviation, again, for continuous or numerical, and then is just a measure of entropy for our categorical fields. And then we got a min, max where it's applicable. So there's no min and max applicable for our categorical fields, but we do see that for our numerical fields. So for example, our customer age, we can see the minimum is 26, the max is 73, and the mean average is 46.33. Again, these are our values that we had pulled out during our exploration in Excel as well. And then again here, if anything was missing, we can quickly see that as well. So the feature statistics is what I would say the first kind of go-to widget when it comes to looking at the data in Orange. We can get a quick overview and see if there's anything of interest in here. One other nice thing about this particular widget is as we're looking at these features, we might at this stage already identify some features that are more important to us or that we think are more important than others. And one of the things that had come up in our previous exploration was that there was some correlation that we had found between the number of transactions that a customer had made and whether they attrited or not, and the total transactions amount for the previous year. There was some correlation there between that and whether a customer was attrited or existing. And so if we look at those distributions here, we can kind of see that visually straight away. So if we go down and find the total transaction amount, we can see we have attrited customers really kind of only down in the bottom part here. And in the terms of the count, the same thing is true. So lower counts have a higher number of attrited customers. Higher, we have like nothing. Same thing with higher amounts, we have nothing. So we might identify, these as being useful. We can kind of command click and select certain features that we'd want to keep, for example. I'm just randomly clicking some here. And then this widget will actually, if we just kind of hover on it for a second, will actually output, as it shows here, reduced data. So you could just get that out and deal with that moving forward. So if we pull in another data table and have a look at our reduced data, we can see here now I've only got those fields that I've selected. So this is a tool that is also useful not just for visualizing and exploring the data, but also for reducing it to only choose features that you want. There's another widget that can be used to do this more kind of automatically, which is the rank widget. But we'll have a look at that when we get into data mining in a future video. So that's how we can do some basic statistic exploration. From there, we might want to have a look at the correlations and then perhaps visualize those on a scatter plot. So the correlations, again, can be used to see if there are correlations between our numerical features. And so we can see here, there are, let's go to all combinations. And don't worry too much about the type of correlation, whether we're doing Pearson or Spearman. Pearson is kind of, I would say, the default go-to with a linear correlation, where Spearmint is also a bit monotonic. In some cases, people would say look at both, but I'll leave that as a discussion for later. For now, we'll just use the widgets and kind of deal with the defaults. So as we can see, looking at all the combinations, all this is very nice again. In Excel, we would kind of have to go through one by one and do them manually. The widget here just automatically looks at, or automagically looks at all the numerical features and then does the correlations for all of them for us here. And so we can see whether things are positively correlated or negatively correlated. And again, no surprises. If you had followed along and gone through the first video, we can see here again, strong correlation, same values that we kind of had seen in the Excel exploration. So transaction amount correlates strongly with transaction count. So, and of course, average open to buy and credit limit. So, I mean, as the credit limit increases, people probably have a little bit more room to purchase. So, some things that are maybe not surprising, but others that may or may not be. So this is kind of a good place to look again to see if there are any correlations between variables that might be of interest. And then moving on from there, we'll jump down to the visualize section. And here we have a number of the different charts and visualizations that we would have used available in Excel. So box plots, distributions, and scatter plots are what we'll look at here. But there are a number of other ones that might come into play depending on the type of visualization you're interested in. But these are the ones that, for the most part, will let us quickly look at our data and get a pretty good idea of what the distributions are and any relationships are between variables. So moving on from correlations, I may want to drop in my scatter plot. We can then again connect our file up to the scatter plot. And so again, the nice thing here is we have one widget to kind of visualize all the things. And so you can see previously I'd kind of doing some work in here, but we'll just go back to kind of the default. So if we have client numbers to customer ages, for example, you can start to get to see if there is any correlation. And there are some interesting things in here. So, it's not necessarily the best. So client number on the x-axis is probably not great. Let's go to customer age and we can do it that way. I don't expect to see really any correlation between these things. And of course, that's what we see. They're kind of all over the map. But now we can choose what we'd like to put on our x and y axes. And we also get them immediately colored by here, our target variable. So again, we don't have to create two series like we would have in Excel. We can just drop the widget on and kind of immediately see things straight away. So let's look at those two that we had seen earlier that we had high correlation for, or we'll just look at the one to keep it short. So I may want on my x-axis the total transaction counts, and on my y-axis we can look at the total transactions amounts. And again, so this is the scatter plot that we had created in Excel. It took a little bit of work, but you can see here in orange that it's kind of quicker to do that. We can just drop a widget, connect our file, and we can immediately see here that our attrited customers, right? There's clearly some lines here, some segmentation that we can see that I think would be very helpful in identifying or classifying attrited versus existing customers. So you could continue plotting, X and Y features, and seeing if there's correlation between them, if any. And then again, maybe that's going to help you decide which variables or features you'd like to include when it comes to doing the analysis piece. So scatter plot, kind of decent. Again, you can visualize that and save these out. Let's look at the distribution widget. So no surprises here. Again, just allow us to see kind of what we had seen previously in the feature statistics. We had all these distributions. This just allows us to kind of focus in on one at a time versus kind of seeing everything in a larger view. So we might want to look at here again. And yeah, there's some other things we can do. So let's look at, for example, education level, right? And then we can choose what we'd like to split that by. So here we have education level, but we might want to split that by the attrition flag. And so now we can quickly again see, based on our target, what each of these looks like in terms of distributions, specifically for attrited and existing customers. And so that might help us again see things a little bit more clearly. We might want to look at gender again by attrition flag so we can see what that looks like. And then for the continuous variables, same thing, right? It'll automatically bin them, and we could mess around with the bin widths, for example. So if we looked at something like customer age, you can see there are quite a few bins. If we wanted to shrink that, we could, let's say, go with bin width of 5. So now we've got chunks of 5. So 30 to 35 to 40, 45 to 50, etc. So you can kind of mess around with the bin widths, and you can also mess around with the fitted distributions if you like. So a couple of additional things you can do quickly with the distributions widget. Again, just to visualize the distributions of values for your features and get a better view of what you're looking at. And last one here we'll look at is the box plot. It's the same thing. We can hook this up, click and point. It's nice and easy. And we can see our box plots for all the features as well. So for example, we might want to look at customer age, and we might want to subgroup that by gender. Again, this is something that we had done in the Excel spreadsheet. So you can see here the box plots are kind of horizontal instead of vertical, but we get the same view essentially, and same information comes out. So we can see the mean, we can see our second and third quartiles, right? So the values here, mode value, things like our median value, max and min value. So kind of useful. And again, the idea that you can quickly subgroup it is quite nice. So we might want to look at, even education level, and right, we can break that down by traded flag. So there's all kinds of income. Let's look at here's a good one. Let's look at the income category and by gender. So different types of visualizations you can perform to get a better view of the data. Again, with colors, it's kind of nice. Yeah, so that's all I want to say about box plots. Again, these are just means for us to visualize things. And I think that's, again, these other bar plots and things, they don't really apply to the data. I think just sticking with these top ones here, the tree viewer will come into play when we do our classification in a later video. But these here, these three will give you a pretty good palette to explore and visualize the data to get some better insight. So let's just go back and visit data real quickly and see if there's anything else in here I want to look at. Yeah, that's fine. The idea that we can select columns or rows will be of interest again when it comes to doing our actual mining. So some of these we'll come back and revisit in a future video, but for now I just want to focus on the things that are introductory for exploring the data. So these will let us kind of peer into and have a look at the data to get a better understanding. If we wanted to go from this point on to do some preparation like we had done previously for our, let's say, our categorical features, we can do something like that in Orange as well. So let's drop this down. And what we can do, this is where things, there's a trade-off between using Orange, which I think to this point, anyone who's gone through the previous video and this one will say, this is like fantastic. Why didn't we just start with this one? Because it's so easy. But that's fine. This is really easy. But then when it comes to doing some of the transformative stuff like we're about to do, it can become a bit more painful. And I would also say in some cases it's not necessary. Orange, many of the widgets are pretty, I would say, clever in the way that they're designed so that they can kind of figure stuff out. So if you had categorical features with alphanumeric values, again, typically we may want to look at converting those using either category scores or dummy variables. But in Orange, a lot of times you can get away without having to do that, and the widgets will kind of do that for you on the fly. But it is possible to be explicit about it and still do those things from within Orange. And so when we look at widgets that can be helpful here, we have continuize and discretize. And so discretize would be useful for our continuous features. So for example, like customer age, if we wanted to bin the ages like we had briefly seen with the distributions here, maybe I want to bin width of 5. We can use discretize to do that. But we won't do that. We'll leave our continuous variables the way they are. But for categorical variables, we can use the continuize widget to pull them in and then do either one of those things. Again, like I mentioned, creating scores or creating dummy variables. But it can be a little bit more painful. So let's I'm going to do this so I can get some scrolling here. This seems kind of ridiculous watching me do it, but it'll work. Okay, so there we go. So here's our file. And let's work on this idea of continuizing things. So we'll drop this widget on and we'll pull our file in. So this is our exploration work done directly on the file. Now we'll be looking at doing our kind of preparation. And then from here, we would move on to do our mining analysis. So we can see the continuize widget takes in a data input and it outputs data. No surprises there. Oops. And before we do that, let's just click on the connection line and see that option here. It's another way to visualize it. So your data comes in, we're going to continuize it, and then it's going to spit out whatever modifications or transformations it's performed. So when we have a look at this, it can be a bit tricky. So we can see the options, the categorical features, numeric features, and categorical outcomes. So there's a question of like, well, what would you like to do with these different things as we find them in the data? And so for our categorical features, we can see we can choose a single option, but we don't get to choose different options for different categories. So this can be troublesome. So for example, our education level, we had identified as being an ordinal category, but something like card group was nominal, right? We don't think there's an order to that, or gender, for example. So we need to ask questions about, well, how do we want to treat these things? So what we can do is say, well, we can only pick one and apply it to everything, but I don't want to apply it to everything. I want to apply different sets to different columns. So we can identify the ones that are grouped together, and then we can just output those via this widget. Numeric features I'm going to leave, but you can see you can standardize and normalize these things. So we'll just leave that for now. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to remove this data connection, and I'm going to first dump in a select columns, because I don't want to do this on everything. I want to select the columns that I want to transform first. So I'm going to rename this. Can I do that? Yeah, let's rename it nominal cats. And so what we can do here is we can select our nominal categories so that we can apply the continuize just to those ones that are nominal. So let's go into the select columns. You might have everything kind of over here already. It might look something like this. So I'm just going to select everything and remove it. So these are all available. And now I'm just going to identify the features that I want to include. So we could even include the target variable. So let's say, for example, gender is a feature. Marital status, I think we said, is nominal. Income category is ordinal. Card category, and then attrition flag is our target. So we can select these columns. These are our nominals. Education level and income level will be our ordinals. So we'll close that. And we can see what that looks like too. Data tables are pretty good for just quickly visualizing what you're dealing with. So here's what we can see. We have our attrition flag, gender, marital status, and card category. That's what we've selected. And so now we can choose to continuize that. Let's get rid of this. And we can open our widget. And what we'd like to do here is, for example, create dummy variables. So we can have one attribute per value. So we select that option. And then when we output that to our data table, we can see that now we've got our alphanumeric category values converted into numeric dummy variables here. So gender gets 1, 2, right? So F, M, and now binary. Again, in the Excel, we had identified that having both of these is redundant. So I just left one, but here we get both. It's not a problem. It does it automatically, so we'll just keep it. And then our marital status, and then our card categories. The one thing I didn't get out was the attrition flag, and I wasn't sure if that would work with the target. So what we can do is we can update that as well. So let's go back to nominal categories. I'm going to remove attrition flag from here. Let's add it here. And now we can look at our data. And now we can see our attrition flag at the very end here. So attrition flag, attrited customer, and attrition flag, existing customer. So that's great. So this is our data transform, but we need these columns combined back with the original data. And we also want to do the same thing with the ordinal ones. So we need to repeat this process for our ordinal categories and then combine both those back in with the original data. So this is where things, again, it takes some time, but once you've got it set up in Orange and you save it as a workflow, obviously it's done once and you forget about it. But it takes some time up front to set up, no different than it would take in something like Excel. So let's repeat this process. I'm just going to, because I'm a bit lazy, I'm going to copy these, I'm going to duplicate them, and we can do the same thing. So this will be, instead of nominal categories, we'll call this ordinal. So our ordinal categories, this is fine. We could rename these too, but the data tables aren't even really important. We'll get rid of those after the fact. So let's go in here and select the ordinal categories. None of these. Let's get rid of those. And education level and income category. Those are what we want to have as ordinals. So we'll close that. Continuize, we want to treat as ordinal, for example, and then we can visualize what that came out as. So we can see now we have income category and education level as scores. So we've done the transformation. So at this stage, we've got two outputs from our continuize widgets that we need to merge back in with the original data. So let's get rid of these widgets, and we can use the merge widget to do that. If you've got two data sets that you want to append one to the other, you can use concatenate for that. But for merging, we can put selected features together using this widget. So we'll have to do this twice. And we can again do this in a couple of ways. One would be to have another select columns, which from the file just pulls in everything but our categories. Since these two little pathways are going to contain both of the categories that we want, we could select everything but the categories from the main file and then just take that and merge it back in. But I'll show you what happens if you don't. Where feature names are the same, we'll get a little warning, but Orange will just kind of create a new feature label for us depending on what it is we're looking at. So we can see how it does that automatically. So let's take from our file and connect that to our merge widget. So again, we can see there's multiple options here. So the data from our file is going to be the original data in the merge. The extra data, that's going to come from our continuize widget here. So this goes data to extra data. And so if we look at the merge, we can see here, it's just going to append the columns from the extra data. So I would expect to see the extra data columns from here just appended to the end of our original data. So it's there's other options here to concatenate some of the things, but this is fine as a default. And so we can quickly visualize what that has done. And so we can see as we scroll across to the end, we've just got our category score variables appended. So that's kind of perfect. That's what we expected. They're included. Awesome. So we've just added them. You'll notice the number of features has increased because we've added those additional columns to our data. And so what we want to do one more time is the same thing. So this will become our original data. We need to do another merge. So this will connect here. And this again will be our data. And our extra data will come from the other continuize module we had. Now you'll see this little exclamation warning. If we open this up, it tells us that some variables have been renamed to avoid duplicates. And that's because when we did the ordinal categories here, the same feature labels were kept. So those names were the same. And so it's like, hey, there's already, for example, an income category field. So that's not going to work. We rename it to avoid the conflict. So, okay, that's fine. So now that those are all merged together, we can see what that looks like. It's kind of messy here. We can push these around to make it look a bit prettier. But we can go and one more time visualize our data as we've put it all together. So now we should see at the very end, we've appended again. Here is our income category. Oops. So it just basically puts a little 2 on there. And then we have the same thing for education level, so we can see our scores. And so at this stage, we kind of have the data at the same place that we left it after going through and applying the same types of transforms in Excel. And so the data coming out here out of this merge widget, this would be the data that we would push on and then use in our data modeling analysis. So that's kind of it. Brought us to the same place that we ended up in the Excel video with an hour or less of the time. But again, I didn't spend a lot of time explaining some of the things that I did in the Excel video. So if you are looking for a bit more explanation or description, I would say have a look at that video. Here we just focus more on how we could do or achieve the same things with Orange that we could in Excel. One thing to note before I let you go is that some of you are probably seeing this and thinking this was way easier and quicker. Why would I ever want to do this in Excel? And one thing to keep in mind is that this is great and it works well if you have Orange available, but it does not make it easy to share, for people that aren't familiar with or don't have the Orange software. Something like Excel is pretty much anywhere. Everyone has it, people understand it, know how to use it. And so doing the work of the exploration and the preparation in Excel, I think, increases the shareability of that data set in the way that we've explored and worked on it. Whereas something like this, the original file, remember, has not been altered at all. So if we wanted to see any of these exploration visuals, if we wanted to see the prepared data as it is going to be used in the analysis, we have to open this in Orange versus having just a comma separated values file that I can share with anybody. So keep that in mind. I don't want to say one is better than the other. It really depends on what you're going to use it for. If you're not going to share the data, or you're working on a small team, let's say, and everyone has access to Orange, and those are the only people that are ever going to need to look at it, then working with an Orange project probably makes a lot of sense. If, however, you thought you might need to share that data with people that don't have Orange or are not familiar with it, or just to export it, then doing the work first and upfront in Excel might be more beneficial because it's maybe easier to share with other people. So two different ways to go about achieving the same type of results. And again, keep in mind what it is that you're trying to do with this data or who you might share it with. And that can help when it comes to determining which one to use, if not both. So that's it. We'll leave it there. In the next video, we'll begin our mining process, and I may begin with the prep data from the Excel file, or I may begin from here. In either case, we've seen how we can achieve the same result in terms of the data that we've prepared. So whether we begin from scratch or from the prepared CSV file from Excel, the next video will show us how we can move away from the data section here, and we'll begin looking at the model and evaluate sections of widgets so that we can begin to do our classification process. So until then, I'll say bye for now.